Let's talk about the business of the day as it relates to theater with your hosts, Darnell Radford and Mitch Weiss. This is The Business of Theater, a working title. Mitch, I know we're looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast. The Business of Theater, the Arts is on Fire.
Sing it, Darnell, sing it.
The Arts is on fire.
Okay, and arts.
The Arts is on fire.
Well done, except arts is a plural.
Except for
Arts
Hell's
is a
Kitchen,
plural.
which is
Arts are on fire.
Arts are on fire. The Arts is on fire?
That's incorrect. As a
I
fact,
know. It's all incorrect. Well, the fact that arts are on fire is incorrect. That's why we can't name the podcast that. I also thought about art school bust.
Oh, we should start with that. But
it's not our bust, it's art school bust.
You know, the nonprofit world, just so we get everyone in on this, schools are just as nonprofit as theater. And there are lessons in both. Go ahead, tell our audience what happened in Philly this week.
Oh, yeah. So, by the way, this is The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford.
Mitchell Weiss.
And let's get down to business. So, on Friday, as you're listening to this, let's see, Friday, March 31st.
That is not today. We are talking in the past.
No, we're talking in the past. Friday, March 31st, the University of the Arts sent a letter to the Philadelphia Inquirer stating that they would abruptly cease operations Friday, June 7th, 2024. That was on May 31st.
May 31st, not March, May.
Yes. This message was sent to the Philadelphia Inquirer through the Philadelphia Inquirer. And that was how hundreds of faculty and staff at the University of the Arts found out that their school of 150 years old was closing for good. So it seems. This is also when they found out that there were a lot of financial issues that no one was talking about that ultimately brought them to this point. Incidentally, the timeline is kind of hazy, but at some point, the Middle States Commission on Higher Education elected to withdraw UArts' accreditation, and the UArts claims that they plan to announce before they could communicate with faculty, staff, and students. Of course, that doesn't make anything. That doesn't make it easier. It only contributes to the fact that this is just the worst news possible. But on top of that,
okay,
hold on. On top of that, the Philadelphia Inquirer has the article behind a paywall. Behind a paywall. So everybody who found out that they were out of a job had to go behind a paywall just to find out. And so if it wasn't for the people, the handful of people who do subscribe to the Philadelphia Inquirer, somebody printed the article so that everyone who was affected by it could actually read it. And so now, as we're recording this today on Monday, June 3rd, the University of the Arts is having a town hall, which I can only imagine is a shouting match of epic proportions. So that's where we are.
And I want to bring it back to the larger picture of the arts rather than that specific situation, because communication and the way we treat employees and the struggle for money and all that other stuff. You think about the pandemic. Everyone went out of business with almost no notification. There were people on Broadway who received a phone call on their way to work. Turn around, don't come in. And Then they were told, well, we're only going to be gone for 3 weeks, relax. That turned into almost 2 years. So that's one way. Then you have 8 theater companies in Seattle who, in 1 month, shut their doors permanently, barely letting, maybe they only had a few employees, but these people didn't get advance notice. And now, what little money they're making, they're out of work. Then we're talking about the larger nonprofits in New York City who laid off their staff for the pandemic, but then didn't communicate with them through the entire pandemic. Didn't say, hi, how are you? Or this is what we're thinking, or this is what's going on. There was zero communication. What are we doing in the arts? You want to get upset and loud about a shouting match? How are we communicating respectfully with people that are barely getting paid? Nevertheless, the ones who do have a job, that they get a decent salary. And of course, what's important about your School of the Arts is that it's a school of the arts. So here goes another example of, do we matter at all?
Do we? I mean, they've been cutting arts education from funding streams for schools for years, and so it's it you can't help but think the they just want society to be as ignorant as humanly possible, because there are so many people who learn so much more, who have such a deeper experience because of their because of their discovery of the arts in all of its wonderful forms. And and sometimes the art allows us to clearly see something we can't articulate, we feel something we can't quite explain, and without those things, what are we as a
But
society? Bunch of unfeeling human
well,
beings.
that's there. Yes, that is there. But taking that a step further, what you just said, I get the feeling that the only people who truly understand how essential the arts are to our education, our emotional education, our growing, and also our happiness, God forbid we bring that
Yeah.
up, are the people working in the arts. What is it
Yeah.
that doesn't allow a relative of mine to come see a show that absolutely devastated me and made me think about things I've never thought of before? And they walk out and go, yeah, that was pretty good. And then they go home and they turn on a cartoon, and that's as far as they're involved or interested. There is a divide. And I'm starting to believe in my old age that the only way, you know how many schools, especially I know here in New York, every student in a public school in New York this year got to see a free show, a free Broadway show. They
Mm.
went out of their way to. The problem is not all of them are good, and some of them are irrelevant. But they all got to see one. But I'm not sure that
Yeah.
means anything to anyone unless they're part of developing the show. And maybe that's
Uh,
what we need to do. We don't necessarily need to send them to see a show. We need to get them involved in building a show or being part of it.
yeah.
That, I think, might be what we're missing in our arts education.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I well, that's in the arts education, but the thing is, like, the question is, there are there people who are interested in the arts and theater, particularly for us, that don't have access to it, or is it just that these programs are dwindling? You
Uh,
know what I mean? Like it's like an is there just not an arts program for you to
oh,
join? You
I
know,
think you're
or
right. I think both are true. I think for those
yeah,
who have access, they aren't encouraged because it's just you have to decide on your own that's what you want to do. Or
yeah,
there are tons of places in this world, forget just in our country, that don't have any access because they can barely find teachers to give them math. You also have to
Hmm.
have teachers who know what they're doing. And teacher education, I mean, we have some brilliant teachers out there. What are we doing with them? We pay them next to nothing. I mean, like I said, this is a nonprofit thing because we're now talking about the public school system, the university system, which may be private. But for the most part, anybody involved in public education is getting as little, if not less, than what we're paying people in the arts.
Yeah.
You can't only look at Broadway, you can't only look at Yale and Harvard to decide are people getting paid enough.
I also don't understand how yes, I'm a director of operations, but there are just some things I didn't make the decision on. We just have them. And I'm not particularly talking about the organization I work for, but it's just in general, it does feel like every time the conversation is being had about things, about expenses and whatnot, everybody's concerned about following a trend. And so they hear like, oh, well, this is the going rate for what we offer for
Mm-hmm.
something like this, at that size. And because someone else is poorly compensating their staff, then they go, well, this is the consensus to poorly compensate our staff. So let's do
Well,
that.
that's
And the thing that always gets me about this is that when you're applying for a grant, you put in everything that will touch this program to figure out how much funding you need to make the program happen. So, unless you're finessing this to just look good for the grant maker and not being honest about how much things really cost, perhaps that is the reason why you can't adequately compensate your staff.
yeah. Well, a very good point you just made. When I was working at the public theater many centuries ago, they we were asked because we were discussing raises, and of course at that time it was the largest theater company in the world. We had over 600 employees, and so we were
Yeah.
asked uh, by producer Joseph Papp, what is the going rate for each job? Are we behind? Are we above? Or are we just floating? Let's at least have the information. And that started a, an informational blitz, which I know even when I worked at Disney, we had to do. We had to find out what people getting paid at Phantom of the Opera uh, in order to know what's fair to pay people at Disney, which was irrelevant, of course.
Mm,
So
yeah.
all of this has become very corporate. And the bottom
Hmm.
line, and you know this, is the way we get paid is by looking at the budget and saying, this is all I can afford to pay you right now. What we don't do is say, this is all we can afford to spend on a production because this is all we have right now. And what we're doing is finding School of the Arts, theater companies in Seattle who are paying more than they have in the bank, hoping they're going to get a grant, hoping their board of directors is going to fill in the holes after they go in the red. Um, I
Hmm.
know I've explained to you before, I was asked to be on the board of directors of an arts education charity, really good work. And in my very first meeting, they fired the CFO because he had not turned in a budget in 3 years, and we found out the organization was $275,000 in debt. This is a tiny little arts nonprofit. And so they
Well,
fired him. And I turned to the rest of the board and said, how come you haven't seen a budget in 3 years? Who didn't ask for it? Well, we asked, but then he asked for another month and he was going to get back to us, and no one pushed for it. Well, it's not just his fault, is it? You should have
no.
known this 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And therefore,
You should also have more than one person looking at your
thank you.
financials.
But they were
Of course.
tiny. They had one CFO who was getting a decent salary because you want your finances to be. They had two accountants on their board. The accountants hadn't bothered to say, I have to see the CFO. So now we've got, we always talk about in politics blame. Blame doesn't help us. but we have to analyze what's going on here. We have people who are so entrenched in the day to day, how do I stay afloat? My job is to stay
Mm.
afloat and get the show up, that they're not seeing the larger picture. We don't have the money. We're post pandemic. People don't want to give us the money. We can't keep begging for money. And the world has changed. So that goes for school. Look, the school, I wish I understood what went wrong there. My guess is someone on their board, somebody who was a previous, and let's be fair to School of the Arts, they have a new leader. The new leader is the one who found the problem. We don't want to blame, I think it's a she, I'm not sure, blame her for what happened. We have to blame the people before her for letting it happen and for no one knowing
Mm.
about it. So, how do we catch everyone up? Do we just keep dreaming the money's going to come in someday? That sounds pretty stupid to me.
Sounds like a poorly written musical.
Go ahead. I love you, Darnell. That's exactly what we need. Let's write a musical right now. And you know what the old joke for Les Mis? You wrote a 3-hour musical about a guy who went to jail for stealing a loaf of bread, and that's a musical? It's like, hey, we can write it about that. And anyway, I'm sorry, that's my
Yeah.
rant. But someone at that School of the Arts, look, they had two problems: lack of communication, which ought to be everybody's responsibility when you're a leader at an organization. And you have to treat people like they're adults. If you find out there's a fiscal problem in February, you don't wait until May to tell everyone about it. You don't have to say we're
Yeah.
closing, but you have to say, hey, we're dealing with a fiscal problem. You know?
Yeah. Also the University of the Arts president, Kerry Walk, said that revenue, including grants and gifts, failed to arrive in time to bolster the school's finances. So I'm wondering if that they have it, they have money now, but it wasn't enough anyway. So I don't know what the particular is of that, but just the fact that statement failed to arrive in time to bolster the school's finances. It makes me think about everyone who is waiting for a grant that they've been approved for. And for some reason, it felt like this year, everyone was taking their sweet time delivering those
Mm-hmm.
grants. I mean, not everybody, but I mean, like, our organization, I'm not getting too deep into it, but there were times where we were waiting on a grant to come and we've got bills to pay. And so it's like really stressful. There was a grant that like I think it was a federal grant that was being distributed by the state and so on, but like the process of how it was received by all the the people who won the grant, there was delay after delay, and it seemed like that they were doing that intentionally. And so I made a joke and said, like, I wonder if they're sending us through these hoops so they can try to generate some interest off of this money wherever it's sitting, and it's like maybe we'll have a little bit more if we just make them wait a
I,
month,
I,
you know.
I think you're right. This is not, um, these are not altruistic people. They are administrators who don't give a flying whatever. They are being paid to just push paper around with, I don't mean all of them, but another example of that, New York City offered a grant to artists, not to nonprofits. These are two real people in theater and music that were having projects, and we will support you and give you a few $1,000s. So the grant proposal read, if you fill out this form and get this in, we will the priority will be given to people who have their projects slated to be done in the first 4 months of the year 2024.
Mm.
We will let you know if you get the money by April 15th.
If
So wait a minute. People who don't have the money are supposed to plan their activity before they know if they're getting the money.
Oh, this is the part. Yeah,
Come
I
on.
was
I
gonna
mean,
touch
this
on
is
this.
just crazy stuff. We have lost our way, Darnell.
See, I guess there was a point in time where it was just like you got a project idea that's grand and you need some support, so you write a
Mm-hmm.
grant. And the grant is because you have an idea that is well thought out and you want to execute. But right now, the organizations need money. They just need
Mm-hmm.
money. Not every organization is out here saying we have a grand gesture to make. No, we have bills to pay. We've got a debt to rise above. And once we rise above that, we can start thinking about what else we can do. But also it's interesting because even even the support you get from individual donors, is still not enough.
No, not.
It's still not enough to function. Like, um, we're always trying to be cute about our need for money, which always gets on my nerves. In a curtain speech, tell me how much money you need right now. Tell me how much. Tell us. You know, take the time. It's not going to kill you to be like, you have a 90-seat house and 60 people are in the theater right now. Then you should be able to say in your curtain speech, we have a goal of raising XYZ. If 60 people donated, blah, 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 this would get us close. Figure out percentages and things like that because people need to know how they can support you if they want to. But if you're vaguely saying, we just need
Right.
money, that's just like your kid coming to you and saying, can I have some money?
Yeah.
For what? I don't know, just walking around money.
But but
Like I don't know how
and
much that
you're
is.
right on the money because again, we're not treating our donors and our subscribers and our ticket holders as adults. They are
Yeah.
entitled to know what's going on and they need information too. People
We're,
who have the money
we're
have said, well, right now I'm building a house. My cash flow is low, blah, blah, blah. That's because all you did was say, I need you to make a donation. But if you said,
mhm,
this is, we need $20,000, we need that to get past this, and they say, well,
mhm.
I don't know, the kind of money I have, I thought you were really looking for 100, maybe I can give you five, right? But at least they have a
I mean
perspective of what you
I mean,
need.
yeah, think about it, like, how many times have you seen an announcement for a capital campaign? Most of the time there's a capital campaign, they're already 80% of the way
Mm-hmm.
there, and so that's why they're announcing, because they're close, and now they can tell you exactly what they need to get there, and that number seems like less, compared to how much they've already had promised, you know? And the thing is, it's interesting, I've always said the theater artists in the community, we are not the audience. We are the marketing because we are the ones, once we go into that theater and walk out of that theater, we're going to talk intensely about our experience. We're going to be able to promote the show by just having a conversation about our experience. We're tapping into things that every the common person is not going to be able to see. And those are the conversations that go on and excite people about us being there. That doesn't mean we don't pay for tickets. It just means like you shouldn't be banking on the community showing up for you. If you claim, well, the theater community itself, if you claim to be a representative, your organization is supporting your neighborhood, your community, which is more than just the friends you employ, but like the people who live near you and possibly in your building, depending on where your organization is. If you're not reaching them, then you have to ask yourselves that question because we already know that we're being supported by a handful of great
Mm-hmm.
donors, and what happens when they decide they want to do something else or when they have a family issue and they have to prioritize, it's like we don't even realize that the support to our community is out of surplus. Like we're not taking, we're not, I'm not saying, when you go to a church, you're supposed to give 10% of what you earn. I don't know that that actually happens, but like we don't have that mindset
Right.
that we have to give a certain percentage to a local organization in our neighborhood. And some people might be self-disciplining on that, but no one ever tells us that we should be thinking about that
Well,
because there's tons of
and
organizations in our
Darnell,
neighborhood where
yeah,
we
but
could.
Darnell, now it's someone who adores theater and I want to see everybody solvent. I have to tell you,
Mhm.
I don't want to support theater that is lying to me and isn't doing great work for my community. So, wait, let me finish this. So, the bottom line still
Mhm.
is you're talking about, okay, there's 60 people in your audience, and you want to be a little more specific with it. Well, let's take it a step further. You're one of these wonderful nonprofits and say, we reduce our ticket sales to the maximum we'll ever charge is $40. Let's use that for an example. And then do your math, theater company. How much does it really cost for that show to be produced? And if it comes out that you need $170 per person who showed up for that show to break even, then why are you saying it's a $40 ticket? The reason Broadway exists at $300 a ticket is because they have figured out we're going to get 65% of the house filled on average, unless we're Hamilton. That's a different story. But in general, with marketing and advertising, we're probably going to get 65% of the house. We figured out the math. We need that kind of ticket sales, especially with discounts that are offered, in order to break even and pay our bills. Otherwise, we close. Now,
Yeah.
nonprofit doesn't have to pay taxes. Oh my goodness, you're already at an advantage. So now what are we missing? If it's $170 a person, we have to rethink this. Is the show you're doing and the experience you're providing worth $170? If it is, and I want to be very positive here, because there are shows that are worth that easily, then let's let the audience know. Oh, you paid $40. I need another $130 per person in this audience for this show to just break even so we can move on to the next show. We didn't charge you that because we know not
And
everyone can afford it. But if you can,
mhm.
please give us $130 for you and your spouse, which sounds crazy to me that we're even asking for that. But we have to stop this begging.
And whatever you identify is the budget of your production. It's kind of like we're all doing it as humans, walking through life. We're budgeting. We're
Mm-hmm.
looking at. I can't afford a vacation, so a vacation's not on the
That's right.
table. It's not that I can't afford a vacation, so I'm going to take out a loan to have the vacation. I'm not going to do things I can't afford to do, but it does feel like arts organizations particularly, but anyone who's going after grants has to promise to do something that is not really within their reach in order to get the funding that they actually need. Sometimes, like, I remember I worked for an organization in the past that one of the conversations we were having in the meeting room was that we don't have a problem getting the funding for the show. We don't have the money to keep the lights on in the building.
Mm.
And there's something to be said about that. It's like, because there's grant makers out there who want to support specific things, and it's about the program. It's almost like I don't care what's going on in your admin office,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, but,
stupid to say. Like that, no, that's not that they don't care about that, but the thing is, like, it's primarily about programming. But this infrastructure needs to be sustainable
yeah, but
too. That has to be part of
So
it.
what nonprofits end up doing is you say, okay, instead of putting if the foundation is only giving you a grant for the production, then the money you would have had to spend on the production is what's going to cover your administration. You're just moving lines in a budget. If you're getting enough money to fund your theater company for all of its productions and its staff, then you have enough. It's just how you move them around in a line. What you're really saying, I think, is they're giving you just enough to only do the productions and not turn on the lights. And that means you're not getting enough money to do what you need to do.
Yes, yes.
Therefore,
But it's also
Therefore, you've got to save the money somewhere. And my guess is what you do is you say, oh, okay, our lighting design, we're going to cut back on rentals or on staff for the production. We're going to do a show that has two less cast members than we did. I don't know. I'm not encouraging that,
Mhm.
but there has to be a sense of reality so that when you get into your next year, you tell your board of directors, we did great this year, but we want to expand next year. We want to do 8 character shows instead of 6 character shows. I'm going to need another $10,000 from each of you to do that, whether you raise it or whether you give it to us. But that's going to allow us to not worry next year. We figured it out. That is not
well,
done. Why not?
it doesn't it doesn't always seem like we're just trying to make it so that we can hire more people, so that more people can work in our organization. Because like, if you have a show that has 4 cast members, right? But next year's goal is to do a larger show that requires more cast members. Like, I feel like that's something that makes more sense to do. It's like, oh, you want to do a bigger production that will employ more people, and that's why you need more money. Okay, great. But if you're going from we do 4 shows a season, now we want to do 6.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's one that's like, I don't know if you have the reach for that for 2 more shows. Like, if these shows aren't strong enough for you to add another show, like, I don't know that that's the right thing to do. Like, we're always thinking about how do we add more instead of just saying, like, how do we just make this so lean and strong that it just
No, you're
works?
absolutely right. But what I'm proposing is that first you have to break even. Therefore, you've caught up, and most nonprofits are in the hole. And they're trying to find
Mhm.
that grant money or anything or donors who will let them get out of the red. Therefore, they're not talking about a year ahead of time. We want to do 2 more shows next year. We need more money. That's a year ahead. You have to be advanced thinking. You can't always be catching up. And of course, that's easier said than done when you inherit an
Yeah.
organization or a leader who doesn't understand that.
Mhm.
Again, the board, my thing is, if I get on a board, which is why I'm not going to be on anybody's board, I'm willing to fire anybody who doesn't get it. You need to keep the people who are at their salary giving you 150%. The first thing you do is you pay them their worth, and you start to, and you keep the ones who get it, whatever get it means to you, but get that we have to be in the black. We have to be planning a year ahead to break even next year as well as this year, or God forbid, have an endowment that lets us move forward. It can go wrong. We get it. Some shows just bomb. Sometimes you have a pandemic. Sometimes there's a hurricane. You cannot solve every problem, but you have to have a plan that says, oh, we might get a hurricane. We better have a fund here. By the way, Broadway has insurance. If your celebrity star is out more than 2 performances, the insurance covers the cost of the money you lost on future performances. It exists. People think ahead. The only ones who don't are some stupid nonprofits. And I'm calling them stupid. It's very not fair. I've been involved in nonprofits and I didn't get to think ahead. This is my wisdom at old age. But things have got to change. And I'm trying to keep these wonderful theater companies alive. I'm not trying to destroy them, but we're constantly replacing the artistic directors, the managing directors, people who are working so hard for next to no money, instead of finding a mentor, an advisor who is going to straighten them out. And that the first thing
Yeah.
you do is you find a way to break even. And then you plan a year ahead. You cannot be behind the eight ball. That's
I think this also creates, or presents another problem. It's hard for people to grow into these organizations if the organization is in such a bind that it needs an angel to
right.
save it. Because like you know, I like to try to see both sides. I don't necessarily agree with one side or the other, but I'm like, I can have the argument, and I'm a good debater,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. um, I can see where you know, I
It's
drew a
okay.
blank. What was I
You're
just
talking
talking
about,
about?
first of all, you're a good debater, which you are. But
Yes.
you,
Oh, arguing both sides of a
okay.
situation. Like I can see how, um, there's something the organization wants to do, and the people who work for the organization don't believe that this is the right thing to do. All of that creates problem if everybody can't see the clear
Mm-hmm.
vision, and then it's just tough when you're like, we barely made it through this, and now you're coming at us with some lofty goals. And the lofty goals, oh, that's what I was thinking earlier. It's that both sides are not as genuine as they could be. So it's like the grant maker wants this grand gesture, and then the organizations, because we know this from our classes at NYU, that people finesse these prospectus. They finesse
Yes.
the grant application so that they can fit into what the
Right.
grant wants to promote or wants to support. And so we may not even be accurately in line with this organization's goals, with the foundation's goals, and that puts us in a situation too. This isn't really what we do, but now we have to add something in order to
Right.
be in line with this
Absolutely.
grant.
And adding to that, that's why there are so many grant writing courses, and why
Mhm.
sometimes the highest paid person on any nonprofit is the
Yeah,
development person.
whoever's in development.
External affairs. I love that title that these nonprofits take, which is basically kissing
Relations,
butt.
yeah, or institutional
You're
advancement.
kissing butt to rich people and to
Definitely.
foundations. And the problem is you do
Yeah.
have to change your goals. Now, on the other hand, some artistic directors don't have goals except what they want. And if you're going to not pay
Mhm.
taxes, some of what you have to do has to fit a service to your community. Some. So
Yeah.
the argument you talk about seeing both sides, well, an artistic director and managing director, they're the ones who need to say, okay, I see both sides, but I'm making a clear choice. And here's why. And then everyone on that or in that organization either has to get on board or needs to leave. And
Mhm.
it's that simple. But my argument is finances should not be the reason you do what you do. You right? You
Yeah.
don't. You're exactly right. And the people who run these foundations, I absolutely get it. If 9,000 people want your money, and you only want to fund 3 people or 3 organizations, you have to give them a category to fit into and saying, this is how I got rid of the other 7,000, as what did I say, 9,000? The other 8,997 people, right? You don't want all those applications. You want to make it clear. And every organization that is giving out money is allowed to say that. If you only want to help with children's cancer, then the people who are helping to get rid of cancer don't fit unless they're helping
Yeah.
children. So, but we got to
You know,
move on
the
from this. Um,
yeah.
by the way,
Well, the other
go
thing
ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, like, and also the infrastructure of this industry is like faulty.
Hmm.
Um, if if organizations, if nonprofits are struggling right now, isn't that a sign that nonprofits need more support? Not particularly money, of course it's money, but it could also be training too. You know, a lot of organizations are just founded by somebody who had a dream or who had a clear
Right,
vision and started the company. But, if you're an artist, right, and you're focused, like you're stellar at your craft, but no part of your craft manages a building lease or the whole process of building, an
right.
infrastructure, a brick and mortar. Like you have to learn that stuff as you go at the same time. Or what are you going to do? Take a year off and go study that while you're focusing on your craft? Like technically, you only need the building to house your art. And so, like these things aren't even
And
taught to us.
perhaps
You have
you
to
want
figure it
someone
out.
on your board who could be for the same reason that almost every board has a lawyer who's on the board.
Hmm.
Because if
Yeah.
you just want a quick legal opinion without having to go to your attorney's office, you have someone to ask. You have someone when you're discussing the future of your organization has a legal interpretation. Oh no, you can't steal that money. You know, that's what
Yeah.
they're there for. So why not have someone who is in real estate? Why not? There has to be more of a reason than just give me $20,000 a year and shut up.
Hmm.
But I move our topic slightly to the left? Ha! Listen to me,
Yeah.
left. That was not
Mm.
meant to be a political statement. Um, that's what a lot of nonprofits claim to do, or have helped the cultural uh, theater, the culture of theater in the United States, is they develop new work. They are a place where you don't have to spend the fortune on Broadway to find out that your show isn't good or it is good. And you have people who will spend some time letting you make changes and working on it without spending millions of dollars. That is one of the great benefits of nonprofit theater. Well, I had a discussion with a major meaning very successful Broadway producer um, just last week. And here's some of the statistics that I think are important for all of us to understand. One show that this producer, developed 12 years ago. It started at a nonprofit. He went to see it as a reading at the nonprofit, fell in love with it, and donated $125,000 for that theater company to then do a better production of it that wasn't a reading. And when he saw that, he went, "Yep, this is what I want." Now, for that 125,000, he also had the rights to then move the show to Broadway or off Broadway if he wanted. So he liked it. He's then went to an off Broadway nonprofit, moved it from out of town into New York, and gave them $125,000 to produce a workshop of it in front of their subscribers. He got nothing back for it. He just had to donate $125,000. From that production, he knew he could raise money for Broadway. This is a show he wanted to do, and he raised the money for Broadway. So he had to lay out a total of $250,000 to get to the point where he believed he had a Broadway hit. And by the way, the show was a Broadway hit. Jump to 12 years later to last year. That's 11 years later. He has a show at a nonprofit, and he wants to see whether or not it will work. So he does a reading, loves the reading. That cost him just a few thousand. Then he gives money to a nonprofit theater similar to the one he had just used in New York City to do a workshop. 11 years later, the same kind of workshop, same size cast, $1.5 million for the workshop in front of a subscription audience, and he gets nothing back. He went from 125,000 to $1.5 million just to see if the show works. What is wrong with this picture? And he's asking that question. Now, luckily, he has the money because he has hits. Then, of course, he starts talking about his latest Broadway show, which the previous one was under $10 million. That's 12 years ago. And this one is a musical, $29 million, of which the show is not that big a hit and it will probably lose all of its money. There is something wrong with our finances. We're here talking about getting some thousands from a foundation grant just to keep your lights on. What is wrong? Now, he's not saying, oh, screw the nonprofits. He gets it. He's trying to figure this out. It's not the salaries. Let's go there because we did an analysis of the salaries. They haven't.
It's capitalism.
It's what?
Capitalism.
Well, bottom line, yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
What it seems to be are the theater costs, the amount of staff that a lot of these nonprofits are using, and the theater costs, the amount of staff and equipment that the Broadway theaters are using, that they are a good 40% of the entire cost of putting on a show. Now, it's always been in that neighborhood, but something is very wrong. And we know no one at those nonprofits is getting rich, except maybe the CEO. And we have to wonder about that. But I don't want to claim that. I'm just wondering. So, yeah. But that can't exist. You can't take a risk on new work coming out of this pandemic and say you need $1.5 million to experiment. I will say, which I'm very proud of, the farm that we have discussed, our developmental organization, we're able to do it for about $7,000 to do a completely developmental workshop. Now, that's really tight. That's with some people not getting paid, some people getting paid. But the question is, why is there such a gap? Why does it go from 7,000 to $1.5 million? So we've got a much larger problem, and it is capitalism. We've always had capitalism. I'm not going to buy that.
Well, it's there. There are a lot of unfortunate things in there that are just beyond anyone's control. Like, for one, there are subsets of the audience that if they don't see a spectacle that is way over the top and has a perceived value of way out of their reach, they're not even interested.
Right, but we're already don't have the audience returning yet.
I know, but I'm saying so if you know that you don't have a ton of audience, you have to maximize your potential to gain revenue off of the audience you have. So your tickets get higher because you have less people buying those tickets. And then if more people come and buy those tickets, now you think that this price point is a price point that people are willing to pay. So the price doesn't actually go down.
Now you're accurately describing the problem, but not the solution. Not the solution. And that's exactly, it's the same thing as a foundation. You're changing your purpose to fit how you get some money. And instead, if you look at some of the most massively impactful and successful financially theater, they did not worry about the money. They said, this is the art. And I'm going to use one, probably not the best example, but I do want to bring it up. It goes way back to 1978. Again, producer Joseph Papp. He had an off-Broadway hit. People loved For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough by Entezaki Shange. Here was a show in 1978 geared towards what seemed to be a black audience, and there was no noticeable black audience on Broadway at that time. None. And Joe Papp said, I'm moving this to Broadway. And people said, you are out of your mind. You will never make the money back. He said, I don't care. I'm nonprofit. I want people to see this. That show made $3 million profit in 1978, right? Those prices. So he just said, here's a show that is phenomenal. People need to see it. He also did not charge a fortune because he knew the audience he wanted to bring in didn't have that money. And he still made that money. And the show is still being done all around the world. So,
do you think that,
I'm sorry.
Do you think that's...
Go ahead. No.
Sorry. I was going to say, do you think that's part of a problem too? Like the stories that are dying to be told are for an audience that isn't what we're used to seeing in the
absolutely
theater.
But Darnell, and that's starting to change as we've noticed after the pandemic. There were tremendous, certainly in the case of black shows, there were more black written and thematic shows that made it to Broadway after the pandemic, for the wrong reason, by the way. That's because the theater owners kind of saw an opening. They couldn't get other shows in there because it was right after the pandemic, and they made these offers. But even for the wrong reason, it happened. They are now being done around the country at various regional theaters after having been on Broadway. The audience on Broadway is now, I'm told by statistics, can't back it up, it's over 20% of the audience on Broadway is a minority audience. That is unbelievably different than 3% back in 1978. It's slow, but it's there. And a lot of it is because of the topic, which brings us to once you have My Fair Lady or Hello Dolly, you don't need another one. They're the best of what they did. So we want new things. We want things we haven't seen before. We have to offer them at a price that people are willing to pay or can pay. And we have to do them in as cost-effective way if you don't have the millions to risk. That's what nonprofit theaters are supposed to do. I'm jumping up and down if the audience can't see me right now. I'm pounding my fists.
For God's sake, Mitch, sit down.
So obnoxious. There we go. We're right back to 1776.
We're a month away. Well, I agree with all that. But what I'm saying is that if there's a piece that needs to be out there, its message needs to be out there, but it's for an audience that, can't conceive of spending the kind of money that is needed for these tickets. And the people that would potentially fund these productions don't see the value in said show because it doesn't reach the traditional audience per se. Like, I feel like that's some of a problem too. Because when you think about it regionally, it does seem like our community is asking for more diverse, inclusive work. There are a lot of stories that speak to what is going on right now that need to be heard, but there aren't people who are willing to support those productions. There aren't as many. And so that's creating a problem too. And it's like, the question is, who is the art really for? It's supposed to be for everybody, but it's funded by a certain class of people, and that certain class likes what
capitalism.
And so,
Capitalism. And you
yes.
hit it on the head. And that's why board of directors, after all this pandemic clamor of DEI, which of course now there's a counter reaction to, um, all of a
Hmm.
sudden we started to get some minority and female producers. We started to get a few new shows that people were considering. There were all of this was in a great direction, and we discovered the work was wonderful. What we may need to do, and I don't have the answer. One, it is improving. Yes, there are people who don't like it, don't want it, and don't even think about it. I don't care about them. I'm going to work with the people who want to add to the art world, our culture, want to move forward with stories that are they're certainly of interest to me. Um, Even especially because I already know about my family. I can see a family drama on Broadway, fine, but Neil Simon is over with. We don't need Oscar and Felix making fun about their white families having divorce and being slobs. That's a great show. It was the best it could have been written by Neil Simon. Now let's move on to the next story that's going to educate me, excite me, give me new ideas, make me grow. And also because you have great talent on stage, who cares? The talent always wins.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, how much does your set cost? How much do your costumes cost? Maybe that's maybe, I'm not saying, maybe for some shows that's not important. That's where we save the money. Maybe. On other shows, it's all about the costumes and the lighting and whatever. There are theater companies, nonprofits that do their work in fields, in front of lakes, in parks. That's how the New York Shakespeare Festival got started. Free Shakespeare in Central Park. And then it became the richest theater company in the world. It took 20 plus years. But first, they did it for free in a park. So let's just take our stories and spend nothing or next to nothing, try to pay our talent as best we can, and let's get this stuff out there. And maybe there will be somebody, maybe, who has some money who will say, I want to support this. And I wish I could say I know who they are because you and I would be
Yeah.
doing tons of stuff that way.
And while producing those shows free in the park, they built a
Yes.
community. They established a even greater mailing list of people who wanted to come and see those shows. So it did serve its purpose as well. Like, it is something that we can do. But it is interesting because these expenses, they're just
Yeah.
there. They just are there. And I just wish there was a better way, or we just thought that it was priority to increase these areas of resource for arts organizations so that we can continue to thrive. But then I think about how we're all struggling, and then I have to ask the question, like, are we even relevant if nobody's coming to
Mm-hmm.
save us? And it's not that we didn't dig a hole. We were producing. Everybody had plans. The smaller companies are trying to build to
Mm-hmm.
multi-year plans. The established companies had multi-year plans in place already, and they were paying attention to the trends and making adjustments. We've done it. When the economy fell out in 2008, 2009, we made adjustments to figure out how we could continue to be consistent. We've constantly showed a face of resilience, right? And so I wonder sometimes if, because we were putting on a good face, that everybody just looked at us and said, we're fine, you know?
Well, and
Uh,
let's not. I know we're a couple of years out.
That's not a
No, no, no.
criticism. I'm
You're
just
you're
saying.
you're speaking truth. Um, but let's also please never forget how impactful the pandemic was to theater and to the arts.
Yeah.
Because if you were making a tiny salary to start with, and you had to subsidize yourself with a waiting job or even a remote teaching job or whatever you had to do, or your father's drugstore. Pandemic ended,
Hmm.
you are stuck there. You can't afford to move out because there's no money in theater. Excuse me. And candidly, we are not going to be rescued by our conservative, excuse my politics, asshole, greedy
Hmm.
politicians. They don't
Yeah.
give a flying again about the arts and about supporting us. It's not something that they think is important. In England, they used to exist and they used to flourish because their government was supporting the arts everywhere. And they have stopped doing it. And everybody, their schools, I've just read two schools closed there, two art schools. They
Mm.
have theater companies all around the country that are closing in England. Everybody's reducing their footprint on the economy. I don't know.
Yeah. I really hope, like, and I know it's easier said than done, but because I've been having many conversations and I'm saying like the traditional model of like how we build to master our craft it has been under attack for a long time. And so we do have to think about other ways to share this information, other ways to
Uh,
share these resources and
Except,
educate people.
you look historically, and again, putting the commercial theater Broadway aside, the Queen of England had to show up to see Shakespeare to give her okay for him to have money,
Hmm.
right? People were poor. This has been history. We don't have rich artists in our history. We now have movie stars. They're rich. And even when they get to Broadway, we pay them more than they probably should get because theater can't afford them. But you have to pay them something. So
Yeah.
if the arts have never been a rich industry, the nonprofit arts, we're
Hmm.
we're trying to change something. We're not trying to get back to something. That's been my mantra from day one. We're trying to move forward. I want theater administrators to get more than $30,000 a year when they're working 7 days a week. They're putting their heart and soul into it, and they are bringing wonderful theater to an audience. They need to make more. Actors who can not only be working at a gym, trying to sell gym memberships, waiting for the fact that when they finally get a theater job, it's for 4 weeks and they're making $50 a week. We cannot
Mm.
sustain that in America. It is embarrassing. So we're not just trying to keep the lights on, we have to make changes. Our priorities have to change. Um, how do we do that? That's a whole nother discussion. And as I want to say, nobody wants to listen to me anyway. If there were a theater
Right.
company that wanted to hire me as a consultant, I would. In fact, I would. I don't want to say I'd do it for free because that's feeding into this. But I believe it can be done. I think there are theater companies out there trying it. The problem is if we don't beg the Jeffrey Sellers on Broadway, the uh, David Stones on Broadway, the Daryl Roths on Broadway, all of these producers who somehow know how to raise white millions of dollars in order to put on a 20, 25, $29 million musical, if they're not willing to support the infrastructure that brings these shows to existence in the first place, and I don't mean give us
Yeah.
millions, there has to be a compromise. I hope next time we're going to talk about off Broadway because there's a whole new push for off Broadway being the compromise between nonprofit and Broadway. And I don't know that
Yeah.
that's true, but you and I, hey, we're good at this. We can debate it and we can at least talk
Yes.
about it. On that basis,
We had a we had a lot to talk about because we're a few weeks since we've had a
yeah,
podcast because this time of year is like wrapping
it's
up.
we haven't even talked
It's
about
like
the Tonys.
yeah, there's a lot of wrapping up going on, and but yes, these conversations will continue, of course. And you'll notice in the show notes there are a couple of links to some articles that we didn't touch on, but I'm going to leave them there because those were things that were weighing on our mind as we had this conversation. So, and I also just want you to note that all the articles about Philadelphia's University of the Arts closing are behind a paywall. So, good luck getting to this information. Take it to the socials where they are being
Well,
very transparent about what's
hopefully
going on.
somebody else is writing about it that isn't behind a paywall, and you'll be able to find that by Googling
Yes,
somewhere.
yes, absolutely. But that's the business of theater, a working title. I'm Darnell
And we are
Radford.
on fire, Darnell. I'm Mitch Weiss.
And we'll see you at the theater.
Oh, please, I hope so. Yay.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of The Business of Theater, a working title, with Darnell Radford and Mitch Weiss. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the podcast with a friend, colleague, or give us some social media love. This podcast is an Emory production. Visit us online at em3ry.com/TBOT. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at em3ryotm.